Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by and coming by and taking a look at my video. Something I will be doing, I've always was kind of doing it before, but I'm just bringing it more to the forefront. If you ever want to skip the intro to my videos, I will have the timestamp. It's a little blue highlighted time stamp that will say, starting analysis starts at the very top of my description. So if you ever want to just skip everything I might say at the beginning and get right to the action, go ahead and do that. It's down there now. So moving forward, I did have people in the past that would mention the lengths of my video and then would also mention the length of my intro. I do my very best to try to not speak very long at the beginning. And sometimes I can be, 40, 50 seconds and then I'm getting right to the game. And I do try to keep, like I said, my videos as short as possible. But sometimes these are very, very long games and it does take quite a while to get through them. And especially when you come up to really complicated concepts, you can't just really summarize it. You have to really kind of go in depth and so that people get the full understanding. And so I always listen to what everybody says, that sends me comments. I do understand that not everybody that watches my videos are native to English. So when I do see what they write, if it does seem a little bit abrupt, or a little bit rude, I do try to assume that it's a translation error and the person is not just trying to be mean. But don't think I don't hear what you're saying. I've gotten to where I've gotten to right now. Anybody who's been around since the very beginning, they do know that I have gotten to where I've gotten because people always give suggestions. They're always critiquing, tweaking different things that I do. Saying, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? So anybody who, like I said, has been there from the beginning has seen like all that has happened and that has changed since the beginning. So don't ever feel like you can't suggest something to me, but do try to be nice about it. Don't try to say, hey, you have to do this or this and that. But feel free to give me suggestions. Say, hey, can you try this? I'm not really so closed off to where I don't try things. I do try to see if I can make it work. As time does go on, it does get harder and harder to do because sometimes things are just not possible. So I do my very best. So I appreciate any feedback that people give me. I appreciate suggestions. And I do feel like I'm much better today than I started because of the things that people have said. It's given me ideas. And so I did get a comment recently about the intro. And so it made me think. I had always been doing where I put chapters in the description, but the problem sometimes is people don't read the description. And so it's kind of far down. So maybe people are missing it. So I want people to be able to skip right to the analysis and, so that they can, get past anything that I might be saying. And stuff like that. And I literally never talk for 3.5 minutes, but I thought I would address that. And like I said, if you ever do want to skip past the intro, I will have it down there where you don't even have to open the description up. It's going to be right at the very top before you see anything else. So I appreciate everybody very much. And to speak these languages real quick, I will say mabuhay, magandang umaga to my people in the Philippines. Kamusta na aking makaibigan. Anybody who is coming from France, I will say bonjour. I can't think of that right now. Comment ça va? Comment allez-vous? Ça me fait plaisir de te voir, mes amis. Merci beaucoup for coming by. Anybody who is from Iran. There was something that somebody told me to say, and I actually forgot what it is. But I will get it. I will remember it. It was a comment that somebody made. But for now, I will say salam and kheli mamnoon. Appreciate you guys very much. But if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. I'm trying to get through this quick, so my video is not crazy long, but let's roll. So we do see E4. Let me get my volume up. Oh, I already had it up. Cool. All right, so we got C6. We see D4, D5, and then we do see E5. So we do see the Caro-Kann, and we see the advanced variation. I mean, there's many different things you can do. I mean, you can just trade. You can play knight to D2, knight to C3. and allow something possibly like that, you know, just kind of however you want to do it. But we do see the advance. So we do see bishop to f5. Almost always, it is very rare to see somebody actually just close the position up like this. Because if you were kind of going to do that, you might as well play the French. The main reason that people, I mean, not the main reason, but one of the reasons that you'll see somebody go from a French to a Caro-Kann is because they don't like having their bishop trapped behind the pawn chain. I love the French myself, so I'm never going to do that. But we do see h4. We got h5. You definitely want to be careful because you don't want to immediately close the bishop out, because then you will be trapping it after g4, bishop to e4, and then f3. And there is not a way for you to sacrifice this bishop for another piece. You're going to have to just take a pawn. So going back to what we had in the game, like I said, after bishop to f5, we saw h4, h5. We see bishop to d3 offering a trade of bishops. Bishop takes d3, queen takes d3. And then we do see queen to a5 with check. You know, you don't generally want to develop your queen this early, but you are coming with a check. So, I mean, you have inconvenienced white just a little bit. So, it's definitely a developing move with tempo. The knight comes to d2. We see e6 now closing the position, but the bishop is already gone. We see knight to e2. We see knight to e7, and then we do see b4. And this is not sacrificing a pawn. If the queen, instead of, so we actually see queen to a6 in the game, which is offering a trade and then bringing the knight out, maybe swinging it back to c7. But if we do see the queen taking here, you're just going to be seeing rook over to b1, and it is held by the knight. That's very important, because if not, you're just going to be gone. And then after the queen moves, we are going to be taking on b7. And we actually have a very active rook. So this is a really nice position for white. But like I said, we did see queen backing up to a6. The queen sliding over to b3. We see knight down to f5. And whether it's the Caro-Kann or the French, the knight is going to, at some point, probably come to f5 by way of knight to e7 or down. Or you can also see knight to h6 and swinging it over. And so you guys understand like why people will go from playing the French to the Caro-Kann, because it is very, very similar structurally. And so that's usually kind of like, you know, a backup opening that some people use and just kind of like understand the differences. So the knight does come to d7. We see a4, and the queen isn't actually in, you know, danger of being trapped. But we do see queen to c4. And then we actually see the novelty of the game, which is bishop to d2. This does allow queen to take on b3, and then the pawn takes on b3. So it does kind of damage white structure a little bit. You do actually have the ability to swing in the rook over here and getting it onto an open file. And you can only ever dream of pushing this pawn because it will be gone. Instead of bishop to d2 after queen comes to c4, it is actually pretty suggested to actually take here because then you basically damage black structure and they don't have any open files for their pieces. So, you know, it's a little bit better. But like I said, after bishop came to d2, we saw this variation. So we do see f6, and this is something that's very common, whether it's a French or a Caro-Kann, because you do have this particular setup, and f6 is a very thematic freeing move for your pieces. You know, you're trying to break down white's pawn chain from the front. So we do have castles by white. We see bishop to e7. We got g3. And this is actually a really nice solid chain here. So we do see king to f7. It's not so uncommon in these types of Caro-Kann French positions to not castle at all. Because of the closed nature of the position, you aren't really worried about some flashing attack that could come at you. But if you are playing open positions, do not do this at all, because your king is just going to die in the center of the boards. We do see rook f to e1. We see pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5. We see rook a to c8. We see knight up to f4, which is a really nice place for it to be. We do see d4. Rook a comes to c1. We see c5. And then we see actually a very nice move by Caruana, and it is to plop the knight onto d5, and it kind of snuck in there. And it might kind of seem strange at first. You're thinking like, wait a minute, man. Like, why is he throwing this knight right here? Because, I mean, you're going to be taking, right? Well, if you actually capture this, this is going to be like a really, really horrible position that you put yourself in, because you're looking at e6 with check. The king comes back to e8. You see pawn taking d7 with check, the king taking on d7, knight would come up to e5, and then after the king sidesteps over, back to e8, you actually see knight to g6. And you have a very, very dangerous position for black. And now it does matter that you didn't castle because your king is a sitting duck in the middle of the board. But like I said, after we saw knight to d5, you know, of course, Firouzja is avoiding this because he's like, hey, man, I'm up there with y'all too. Like, I'm not going to put myself in that bad spot. And plus, he was a train. He's been a train this whole, you know, this whole tournament. So pawn takes on b4. We see knight taking e7, knight taking e7, and then we actually see knight to g5 with check. And this is knocking the king away from the protection of this pawn. So we're going to be getting our pawn back. King comes to g6. We see king, rook taking c8, rook taking c8, and then the knight does take on e6. Knight comes to c6, and now we're throwing a little double attack on this pawn. But we actually have a really nice way of defending it, which is just like basically completing your pawn structure. So we have a really nice structure going on in the middle of the board for white. And we do have a passed pawn on e5. It is dead even. But you know, the structure does look really nice for white. So we do see king down to f5. We see knight takes g7 with check. The king comes back to g6. And then we actually see knight back to e6. And we actually have a position where the computer is telling you that it wants to just continue on with the draw. It basically just wants you to keep going back and forth. It doesn't want either side to give. But Caruana says, you know what? I don't want to do that. King comes back to f5, and then we actually see him change moves to knight to g5. Because he's like, hey, man, we're dead even, but I'm going to fight this game, just like Firouzja would do. The knight comes down to c5. We see knight up to f7. We see king up to e6, attacking the knight. The knight comes down to d6, and now we are attacking this rook. The rook slides over to g8, and then we actually see king to g2. And we have actually reached a position where there is an only move for black. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video and guess this only move, go ahead and do so. Okay, so I think this is a really tough position to actually be in because I think that for a lot of people, this pawn on b2 looks super juicy. The problem is you actually cannot capture this pawn because it puts your position in, it puts you in a really, really bad position. So if we go into exploring what that would look like, first of all, let me tell the move. The move is actually king to d5, not taking the pawn. So you know, you have to be careful when you're just going to be grabbing people's pawns and stuff like that. I mean, you know, you want to make sure that you calculate that there's nothing that your opponent can do to you because you definitely don't want to get caught reaching in the cookie jar. But coming back, after the king did go to g2, if we did see knight taking b3, this would actually be giving white a very, very nice position after the move f5 with check. And then the king would be forced pretty much down to d5, and then you would actually see knight down to e4, and you are threatening some nasties after knight to f6. And you can't even, you don't want to take with the king, because you are going to be dropping your knight over here. And if you did say, hey, man, I'm not going to take with the king, but I'm going to take with this knight. Well, I mean, you know, you're just looking at that fork. So, I mean, there's nothing that you can really do after this position. It is going to be a done deal. So you definitely don't want to go into doing that. So like I said, be very careful when you do take pawns. Try to see, you know, is your king in danger? And that's the thing. So the rook does slide over to b1, now protecting the pawn because it is live now. The knight comes down to e4. We see knight takes e4, king takes e4. We see rook over to c1, and then we see king to d3. The bishop comes down to f1, and then we see king to e2. And it's really kind of crazy because this king has literally walked all the way from here, all the way down into your kitchen. So it's like, hey, bro, I'm here. I'm in there, dog. Anyway, so we see e6. We got d3. We see f5. Knight comes down to e4. We see bishop taking b4, and then we actually have a really kind of annoying move, which, I mean, white is in a really dominant position here, but it takes a lot of skill and a lot of calculation to figure out, you know, what does white have in this position. It takes some in-game knowledge, something I'm going to be getting to in a minute. We do see d2, and I mean, now the problem is you can't swing this rook over, so you know you're in a position where you have to give up a piece. So are you going to give up the bishop, or are you going to give up the rook? You really can't give up the rook. I mean, you can if you move it away and then you pawn and then you give the rook up. But I mean, I'm going to choose the bishop just like Fabi did. Bishop takes d2, king takes d2, and now you are down an entire piece. But The main thing that you have to be paying attention to in the position is that these passed pawns are actually very, very dangerous. And they are very, very far advanced, and they are connected. So the first thing that Fabiano does is he actually protects his backward pawn on f5 with rook to c5. And I mean, you know, this king is going to start trying to come in and stuff. And so this is a really, really nice position for white, even though it looks like they're down. The rook swings over to e8. We see rook over to e5, just, you know, trying to make sure that not only do we hold this pawn, but we are, you know, threatening to try to push some pawns forward. We see king up to d3. We see king over to f2, trying to get the king in the mix. The rook comes down to e7, trying to, you know, maybe, you know, prevent the pawns from rolling forward. We do see g4, which frees the king up a little bit. Pawn takes g4, king goes to g3. We see rook back to e7, king takes on g4. The knight comes up to c6. We see king over to f4, and then we actually kind of start seeing some interesting positions come up. You definitely don't just want to take here because the king is going to be here, then the pawn is going to push, and I mean, that's lights out. So the knight comes over to e7, but I mean, it is too little too late. There really isn't anything that you can do in this position here. We see the move f6, and now we have gotten in the position where you have both of these pawns on the 6th rank, and not only that, but they are protected. If you took this rook off the board, you would still pretty much be winning because of how far advanced these pawns are. I just mentioned last video this exact thing. Once you have two connected passed pawns that reach the 6th rank, there is almost nothing that the opponent can do other than sacrificing pieces that is going to stop them. Because they are going to be pushing. I literally just played a game a minute ago, and I had to give up one of my pieces, but I had these passed pawns, so I was happy. We do see knight coming to g6 with check, but, you know, Fabi's not worried. I mean, you know, you're definitely not worried about the knight taking this rook because they could have did it a long time ago. The king comes up to f5. We see knight taking h4 with check. The king sidestepping over to g5. Then we do see knight to f3 with check. The king sidesteps down to f4, and now there are no more checks. So something is going to have to give. So the knight comes to d4, and then we see e7, and this is completely immobilizing this rook. The knight comes back up to c6, but like I said before, there is just nothing to be done in this position. We see f7, and now it is crunch time. There is something that's going to have to be done. I mean, you kind of hope that, you know, the knight is going to take here, and then the king is going to say, hey, man, I don't like myself very much, and is going to do this, and it's just going to drop drop some material and lose, but we're not doing that. Fabi says, hey, man, we're not doing that. So we do see, like I said, after f7, we do see the rook taking, and what we actually see in the game is rook to d5, and rook to d5 ends the game. This is the moment that Alireza Firouzja does resign the game, so I mean, I will say that the Firouzja train did slow down some. He is still co-leading, so he is definitely not like dropped some places. He's still in the lead with Fabi, and actually David Howell is leading as well. So it's crazy. But this was a position that he resigned. Now, the only hope that Alireza Firouzja had after the rook took on f7 was that you know, the rook was going to take e7, and then the knight was going to take e7, and then Fabi was going to fall asleep and play queens here, and then this is absolutely losing after knight comes to g6 with check, and then you're just like, oh, no. But he didn't do that. He stayed sharp, and he just played rook to d5 and just ended the game. You know, now there is no checks. There's no anything going on. It doesn't matter where the king moves. You are going to be queening on the next move. It is all queening. So that is that game. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. And like I always said, I will put in the description at the very tip top, and I will start mentioning this every video. I won't go into super detail, but I will always mention to people that if you do want to skip any of the intros I ever do and get right to the action, go ahead and just pop and just click that button right there in the description, and you can skip, and then you can live happily ever after. So I appreciate everything very much. I did learn this phrase, but it has become a little bit hard for me to say. Kapampangan sa iyo. I'm trying to work on getting that correct. Correct? Kapampangan sa iyo. I'm trying to say peace to you. So like, you know, ingat lagi mabuting pagbati I appreciate everybody very much. Merci beaucoup. And I'll see everybody next time.